Racism often hides behind handshakes and boardroom smiles, but in a high-rise Atlanta office, that quiet truth erupts in plain view. When a wealthy investor refuses to shake hands with a black man during a pivotal meeting, he thinks nothing of it, just another day maintaining the old order. What he doesn't know is that the man he snubbed is the CEO who built the company from the ground up, carrying generations of resilience and quiet strength. That single slight sets off a chain of events that will expose prejudice, shake corporate power, and prove that justice, once awakened, can't be ignored. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gleaming glass facade of Omnivise's headquarters in downtown Atlanta. Elijah Brooks walked through the employee entrance, his polished dress shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, but intentionally understated, the kind that spoke of quality without shouting about its price tag. "Morning, Mr. James," Elijah called out to the elderly janitor who was carefully polishing the brass handrails. "How's that grandson of yours doing in college?" Mr. James's face lit up. "Made the dean's list again, Mr. Brooks. That scholarship program of yours changed his life." "He earned it," Elijah said warmly, pausing to chat. "His hard work did that, not me." At the front desk, Maria the receptionist greeted him with a bright smile. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. Your daughter's already upstairs in the war room, prepping for the big meeting." "Thanks, Maria. How's your mom feeling after her surgery?" "Much better. Those flowers you sent really lifted her spirits." Elijah nodded, genuinely pleased. He'd learned from his mother that true leadership meant remembering the human details, the small things that made people feel seen. The executive elevator whispered him up to the 50th floor. His corner office offered a stunning view of the Atlanta skyline, but he headed straight for the executive briefing room, where his leadership team had gathered for their Monday morning meeting. 12 faces turned to greet him, but only Camilla stood. His daughter's sharp blazer and confident stance reflected everything he'd hoped she'd become: fierce, brilliant, and unafraid. At 26, she already commanded the room like a seasoned CEO. "The Whitmore team arrived early," she reported, handing him a sleek tablet. "They're settling into the client lounge on 49. Elijah scrolled through the morning's agenda, noting how Camilla had meticulously prepared every detail. The investment they were pursuing would be transformative. $100 million to expand Omnivise's reach into emerging markets. "Remember, everyone," Elijah addressed his team, "today we're testing more than just investment potential. We're testing character." He looked at each face around the table. "I'll be observing the meeting as a regular team member. No one mentions my position to the Whitmore Group." Marcus, his chief financial officer, raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this, Elijah? Charles Whitmore III isn't known for his progressive attitudes." "Exactly why we're doing it this way," Camilla cut in, her voice carrying the same quiet intensity as her father's. "Let's see who he really is when he thinks no one important is watching." The team reviewed quarterly projections and department updates, but there was an electric undercurrent of anticipation in the room. Everyone knew what was really at stake today went far beyond money. After the briefing, Camilla walked beside her father toward the main boardroom. Her heels matched his stride perfectly, a rhythm they'd perfected over years of walking these halls together. "Security confirmed Whitmore's in the building," she said softly. "Did you see the background check I ran?" "Third-generation wealth," Elijah nodded. "Family made their fortune in Connecticut shipping. Interesting that all 28 companies in his current portfolio have white CEOs." "Not interesting. Intentional." Camilla's jaw tightened. "Dad, are you sure about this approach? We could just—" "Sometimes," Elijah interrupted gently. You have to let people show you who they are before you show them who you are. They reached the boardroom doors. Through the glass, they could see Charles Whitmore III holding court at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the morning light. His Italian suit probably cost more than most people's cars. "Ready?" Camilla asked, straightening her father's tie out of habit. Elijah smiled, thinking of his mother who had pressed his shirts for years while cleaning other people's homes. "Always ready, baby girl." They entered the boardroom. Camilla strode confidently to the presentation position while Elijah quietly took a seat at the far end of the table. He pulled out a simple notebook and pen, the picture of an ordinary team member prepared to take notes. Charles Whitmore III barely glanced in his direction, his attention focused entirely on Camilla and the other executives filing in. Elijah settled into his chair, his calm exterior masking decades of experience reading rooms just like this one. The morning sun continued its climb over Atlanta, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and illuminating the stage where power, prejudice, and justice were about to meet in ways none of them could predict. The boardroom doors swung open with practiced precision as Charles Whitmore III made his entrance. His presence filled the space like expensive cologne, overwhelming and deliberately noticed. His assistant, a young man clutching a leather portfolio, scurried 2 steps behind him. Charles's steel-gray suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His monogrammed cufflinks caught the morning light as he extended his hand to Camilla, his smile calculated and practiced. "Ms. Brooks," he purred, holding her hand a moment too long. "Stunning presentation setup you have here. Very modern." The pause before modern carried a weight of judgment, as if modernity itself was something he merely tolerated. Charles worked his way around the table, shaking hands with each executive. "Tom, good to see you again. That golf game at the country club still on for Sunday?" He nodded at another face. "Mike, how's that boat treating you? Still docked at Newport?" His networking dance was precise, each greeting carefully calibrated to remind everyone of his social status. He reached Marcus, the CFO, and his handshake became noticeably shorter. When he passed Elijah's seat, his eyes skipped over him completely, as if the chair was empty. Elijah rose quietly, extending his hand with the same dignity his mother had taught him through years of watching her navigate white spaces. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Charles's eyes flicked to Elijah's face, then away. His lip curled slightly as he turned back to Camilla, speaking over Elijah's outstretched hand as if swatting away an annoying fly. "Shall we begin? I have several other meetings today." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus gripped his pen so hard it nearly snapped. Camilla's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened like polished granite. Elijah lowered his hand slowly and sat back down, his face a mask of calm. He'd seen this dance before, had watched his mother endure it countless times. Patience, she'd always said, was sometimes the sharpest weapon. "Of course," Camilla replied smoothly, clicking to her first slide. Omnivise's market penetration in the last quarter exceeded projections by 37%. Charles settled into his chair, like a king on a throne, absently gesturing for his assistant to pour his water. "Impressive numbers, if they're sustainable. Though I have to wonder about the demographic challenges in your target markets." "Demographic challenges?" Camilla's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Let's be direct," Charles said, waving his hand. "Your consumer base skews heavily urban, inner city. That presents certain risks." He paused to sip his water. "My fund prefers companies with more traditional market stability." The coded language hung in the air like smoke. Elijah made a small note in his notebook, his pen strokes deliberate and unhurried. Charles continued through his own presentation, each slide filled with subtle digs masked as business wisdom. "Culture fit is essential for our portfolio companies," he declared. "We maintain certain standards, a certain professional appearance." His eyes swept the room, lingering disapprovingly on Elijah's modest suit before continuing. "Our $100 million investment would come with certain expectations about corporate governance, about who sits in which chairs." Camilla's knuckles whitened around her tablet, but her voice remained steady. "Our governance structure is quite clear in the prospectus." "Yes, yes," Charles waved dismissively. "But these things can be adjusted. Speaking of which, I'm surprised your CEO isn't here. This is rather a significant discussion to delegate to." He glanced at Camilla with barely concealed condescension. "Junior executives." Elijah made another note, his pen scratching softly against paper. The sound drew Charles's irritated glance. "Could someone get him to stop that distracting scratching?" Charles snapped. "This isn't a stenography session. Perhaps you could take notes somewhere else?" Before anyone could respond, Charles pulled out a thick portfolio and placed it on the table with a definitive thump. "Now then, I believe we've covered the preliminaries. I look forward to speaking with the CEO directly. Someone who can make real decisions." "What perfect timing," Camilla said, her smile now radiant with anticipated justice. "Let me introduce him now." She gestured toward the far end of the table. "Mr. Whitmore, I believe you've been trying to ignore our CEO, my father, Elijah Brooks, for the past hour." The color drained from Charles's face as his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Every eye darted between Elijah and Charles, watching this moment of reckoning unfold. Elijah rose from his chair with the same quiet dignity he'd shown all morning. Once again, he extended his hand across the table. "Mr. Whitmore, shall we try this introduction again?" Charles's hand twitched at his side, but he didn't raise it. Instead, he cleared his throat and straightened his tie. "I wasn't aware. That is to say, your position wasn't made clear to me beforehand. And that would have changed your behavior?" Elijah's voice was soft, but carried to every corner of the room. Charles's face flushed red. He shuffled the papers in front of him, desperate for something to do with his hands. Anything except shake Elijah's still extended one. "Well, naturally. Protocol dictates. I mean, had I known your role—" "My role," Elijah said, finally lowering his hand, "is exactly what it's been for the past hour. I'm the founder and CEO of Omnivise Technologies. Now, shall we discuss your concerns about our demographic challenges?" Charles's assistant seemed to shrink in his chair, frantically scribbling notes while avoiding eye contact with anyone. The other executives sat straighter, some barely concealing their satisfied smirks. "Perhaps we should review your technical assessment of our AI infrastructure," Elijah continued, clicking to a complex diagram on the screen. "You mentioned concerns about scalability. Could you elaborate on which specific components you feel are at risk?" Charles tugged at his collar. "Well, obviously the cloud architecture. That is, the neural networks." "Which neural networks specifically?" Elijah's question was razor-sharp beneath its calm surface. "Our proprietary K-12 learning models, or the healthcare diagnostic systems?" "Both, naturally," Charles fumbled. "The whole system needs proper oversight." "Interesting." Elijah pulled up another slide. "Because our K-12 models aren't cloud-based, Mr. Whitmore. They run on edge computing devices in schools. It's in our basic product documentation." Camilla leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Perhaps you missed that section during your due diligence?" Charles's face grew even redder. "My team handles the technical reviews. I focus on the bigger picture." "The bigger picture," Elijah echoed. Like our demographic challenges? The next 30 minutes were an elegant dismantling of every assumption Charles had made. With each question, Elijah exposed the shallow depth of Charles's understanding of both the technology and the markets he claimed to be concerned about. When the meeting finally ended, Charles stood quickly, straightening his jacket. "Miss Brooks," he said to Camilla, pointedly not looking at Elijah, "might I have a word in private? About future meetings?" Camilla's eyebrow arched. "Anything you need to say to me can be said to our CEO." "It's a delicate matter of protocol," Charles insisted. "Certain conversations are better handled at appropriate levels." "And what level would that be, Mr. Whitmore?" Elijah's voice cut through the tension. Before Charles could respond, Camilla stood. "My office. Both of you. Now." The walk to Camilla's office was silent, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Charles's assistant tried to follow, but one look from Camilla stopped him in his tracks. Inside her office, with its wall of windows overlooking Atlanta's skyline, Camilla turned to face Charles. "You wanted to talk about protocol?" Charles smoothed his tie again, a nervous habit becoming more pronounced. "I simply meant that future negotiations might proceed more smoothly with a different arrangement of participants." "Different participants?" Camilla's voice could have frozen hell. "I think we all know what Mr. Whitmore is suggesting," Elijah said calmly, "but I have a different proposal." He turned to his daughter. "Don't reject his offer yet." "What?" Camilla's shock was evident. "Let's give Mr. Whitmore a chance to demonstrate his commitment to understanding our company. A week-long immersion tour, perhaps?" Elijah's smile was peaceful, but his eyes were sharp. "Every department, every level. Full exposure to our culture and our people." "Dad, you can't be serious." "Let him dig his own hole," Elijah said, that calm smile never wavering. "Sometimes people need a longer rope to show everyone exactly who they are." Charles stood trapped between them, his carefully constructed world of privilege beginning to crack around the edges. He opened his mouth to object, but no words came out. The warm glow of Edison's soul food kitchen wrapped around Elijah like a familiar embrace. He'd chosen this restaurant deliberately. It was one of Atlanta's oldest black-owned establishments, where generations of civil rights leaders had broken bread and planned movements. The private dining room's walls were lined with black and white photographs documenting that rich history. "Dad, I still think you're being too generous," Camilla said, stirring her sweet tea. Around the large round table, Omnivise's executive team nodded in agreement. The aroma of freshly baked cornbread and slow-cooked collard greens filled the air. Elijah carefully wiped his mouth with a napkin. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't an immediate strike. It's giving someone enough space to reveal their true nature. Marcus Thompson, their chief technology officer, leaned forward. But after what he did today, the disrespect was plain as day. "That's exactly why this matters," Elijah replied. He gestured to a photograph on the wall, one showing Dr. King at this very restaurant. "Change doesn't always come from confrontation alone. Sometimes it comes from forcing people to see themselves clearly." The waitress brought out plates of crispy fried chicken, mac and cheese, and sweet potato pie. As she arranged the dishes, Elijah thanked her by name. He'd known Miss Ruby for 20 years. "Here's what I'm thinking," Elijah continued, his voice taking on the quiet intensity that always commanded attention. "We'll start Charles in our youth coding academy in Vine City. Let him see the brilliant minds his prejudice would overlook." Camilla's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "The same kids he probably assumes can't even use a computer?" "Exactly," Elijah nodded. "Then we'll move him through our innovation labs, where our diverse engineering teams are developing AI that actually serves all communities, not just the privileged few." "And the community outreach programs?" asked Sarah Chen, their head of social impact. Day 3, Elijah confirmed. He'll see how we're teaching entrepreneurship in neighborhoods he probably avoids driving through. How we're turning demographic challenges into demographic advantages. The executive team exchanged knowing looks. They'd all witnessed Charles's thinly veiled racism during the meeting. But what's the end game? Camilla pressed, her fork tapping against her plate. We don't actually want his money, do we? Elijah's eyes crinkled at the corners. What we want is for every Charles Whitmore in every boardroom to understand. The future they fear is already here, and it's more brilliant than they could have imagined. You're going to make him face every assumption he's ever made, Camilla realized, a slow smile spreading across her face. Every single one, Elijah confirmed. And he'll have to do it publicly. His reputation depends on it now. The team spent the next hour planning the details. They would ensure Charles met their youngest coding prodigies, their most innovative engineers, their most successful community graduates. No escape routes, no comfortable excuses. What if he refuses? Marcus asked, finishing his sweet potato pie. He won't, Camilla said confidently. His ego won't let him. He has to prove he's not what everyone in that boardroom saw today. Elijah nodded, dabbing his mouth one final time. Pride is a powerful motivator. So is fear of public shame. Later that evening, after the team had left, Camilla lingered with her father. The restaurant was quiet now, just the soft sounds of cleanup from the kitchen. You learned this from Grandma, didn't you? She asked softly. This way of dealing with people like Charles? Elijah's eyes grew distant. Your grandmother cleaned houses for men like Charles. She knew their wives, their children, their secrets. She taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people reveal themselves while you watch and wait. But she never had the power you have now, Camilla pointed out. No, Elijah agreed. Which is exactly why we have to use it wisely. The next morning, Charles Whitmore III sat at his mahogany desk in his Connecticut office, staring at the formal invitation that had just arrived by courier. The heavy cream-colored paper bore Omnivise's embossed logo. You are cordially invited to participate in the Omnivise Founders Experience Week. Join CEO Elijah Brooks for an exclusive inside look at our company's culture, innovation, and community impact. Your unique perspective as a potential strategic partner would be invaluable. Charles's hand trembled slightly as he read the words. His assistant hovered nervously nearby, waiting for a response. After a long moment, Charles picked up his Mont Blanc pen and checked the Accept with Pleasure box. He couldn't refuse. Not after yesterday's debacle. This was his chance to repair the damage, to show he was open-minded and progressive. Send this back immediately, he told his assistant, and clear my calendar for next week. Little did he know, Elijah was at that very moment reviewing the final details of Charles's itinerary, each day carefully designed to dismantle another layer of prejudice. The trap was set, baited with Charles's own pride and desperation to save face. The converted warehouse stood like a beacon in downtown Atlanta, its red brick walls freshly restored and its windows gleaming in the morning sun. The Omnivise Community Innovation Center's sign proudly displayed its mission, building tomorrow's tech leaders today. Charles Whitmore III tugged at his designer tie, already feeling out of place. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished concrete floor as he entered the building, his assistant, Thomas, trailing behind with a tablet and portfolio. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. A young black woman in a crisp blazer greeted them at the reception desk. I'm Dr. Keisha Washington, Director of Engineering Education. Charles blinked, caught off guard by her title. Doctor of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence, MIT, she replied smoothly. Shall we begin the tour? The first stop was an open-concept workspace, where dozens of engineers huddled around large screens, discussing code and system architecture. The steady hum of focused conversation filled the air. "This is our primary development hub," Dr. Washington explained. "We're currently working on an AI-driven healthcare platform that addresses historical bias in medical data sets." A young man with dreadlocks and wire-rimmed glasses approached them. "Mr. Whitmore, welcome. I'm Marcus Chen, lead AI architect. Would you like to see our latest neural network implementation?" Charles nodded stiffly, his eyes darting between Marcus's casual tech company attire and the complex diagrams on his screen. "It's quite impressive that you've mastered such complex technology." Marcus's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Well, I did graduate top of my class at Stanford before earning my PhD at Carnegie Mellon. Mastering technology is what we do here." They moved through various departments, each stop revealing another layer of excellence that seemed to unsettle Charles more and more. In the UX design studio, a team of Black and Latina women presented their award-winning interface designs. In the blockchain division, a young man in a kufi cap explained their groundbreaking work in decentralized finance. "Remarkable," Charles kept saying, his tone growing increasingly strained. "So inspiring to see these kinds of opportunities being provided." Thomas, his assistant, winced at each backhanded compliment. He noticed how the professionals exchanged knowing looks, their patience wearing thin beneath polite smiles. In the artificial intelligence lab, they met Dr. James Baldwin, no relation, he joked, who was leading a team developing facial recognition software that actually worked accurately across all skin tones. "You see, traditional AI has shown significant bias," Dr. Baldwin began. Yes, Charles interrupted. "Very commendable, helping your community overcome these challenges." "Actually," Dr. Baldwin said firmly, "we're helping every tech company overcome their failures to account for human diversity. Our patents are already being licensed by 3 Fortune 500 companies." The tour continued through a startup incubator space where young entrepreneurs pitched their ideas. Charles's comments became increasingly patronizing. "It warms my heart to see them trying their hand at business," he murmured to Thomas, loud enough for others to hear. "Though they might benefit from more traditional business training." "Each entrepreneur here has at least one advanced degree," Dr. Washington interjected coolly. "Many have previously founded successful companies." Near the end of the tour, they visited a classroom where high school students were learning advanced programming. A young girl, no more than 16, demonstrated an app she'd created to help elderly neighbors coordinate medical appointments. "How sweet," Charles said, patting her shoulder condescendingly. "Keep reaching for those stars." "Thank you," the girl replied with a sharp smile. "My app just won the national STEM competition last month. Google and Apple are both interested in acquiring it." As they headed toward the exit, Charles loosened his tie further. The morning had clearly taxed his worldview. The facility's achievements were undeniable, yet he seemed determined to frame them as exceptions rather than examples of excellence. "Well," he said to Thomas, as they approached the glass doors, straightening his suit jacket, "it's well run for what it is." Behind a nearby pillar, Camilla Brooks stood silently, her phone recording every word. She'd been shadowing the tour, documenting Charles's reactions. Her father had been right. Give him enough rope, and he'd hang himself with his own words. Thomas glanced back nervously, having spotted Camilla earlier, but choosing not to alert his boss. The assistant's face showed a mix of embarrassment and resignation, all too familiar with his employer's attitudes. Through the windows, they could see Elijah Brooks's car pulling up for the next phase of the tour. Charles tugged at his collar again, unaware that his every dismissive comment, every patronizing smile, every backhanded compliment had been noted, and would become part of a larger lesson, one he wasn't prepared to learn. The private dining room at Marcel's, Atlanta's premier French restaurant, glowed with warm lighting and polished mahogany. Charles Whitmore III settled into his leather chair at the head of the table, already on his second glass of Bordeaux. Around him sat Omnivise's diversity and inclusion leadership team, all accomplished professionals whose very presence seemed to make him increasingly uncomfortable. Dr. Maya Richardson, head of Global Inclusion Strategy, sat to his right. Her Harvard MBA pin gleamed on her lapel as she delicately cut into her steak. "Mr. Whitmore, what are your thoughts on our talent pipeline programs after today's tour?" Charles swirled his wine, his cheeks slightly flushed. "Well, it's certainly colorful." He chuckled at his own joke, but the room remained silent. "What I mean is, while these initiatives are admirable, we must consider the broader business culture." "Please elaborate," said Marcus Chen, who had joined them from the morning tour. His expression was neutral, but his fingers tapped steadily against his water glass. "Well," Charles leaned back, loosening his tie. "In my 40 years of experience, I've found that certain, shall we say, traditional corporate values ensure the smoothest operations. It's about cultural fit, you understand." Dr. Richardson's fork clinked against her plate. "Traditional values? Could you be more specific?" "Oh, you know," Charles waved his hand dismissively. "Proper business etiquette, established hierarchies, respect for conventional leadership styles." He took another long sip of wine. "These modern approaches, while well-intentioned, can sometimes disturb the natural order of things." Across the table, Camilla Brooks discreetly typed on her phone under the table, "He's hanging himself. Every word is pure gold." She sent the text to her father, then looked up with a practiced smile. "Natural order?" she prompted innocently. "Please tell us more about that, Mr. Whitmore." The wine had loosened Charles's tongue considerably. "Take dress codes, for instance. I noticed quite a few unusual choices today. Dreadlocks, ethnic garments. It's not what clients expect in a serious business environment." Several team members exchanged glances. Dr. Richardson cleared her throat. "Our dress code celebrates authenticity while maintaining professionalism. It's actually increased productivity and client satisfaction." "Yes, yes," Charles chuckled patronizingly. "But what about the optics? Major investors might be less understanding." "Less understanding of what, exactly?" Marcus asked quietly. Charles missed the dangerous edge in Marcus's tone. "Well, when I started in venture capital, we had certain standards. Not everyone is ready for such a diverse approach. Some of my colleagues might need convincing that this isn't just some social experiment." Camilla's phone buzzed with her father's response. "Let him talk. Every word is a nail in his own coffin." The conversation continued through dinner, with Charles growing more candid with each glass of wine. He told tone-deaf jokes about urban culture, repeatedly referred to the women present as girls, and suggested that perhaps some departments needed a firmer hand to maintain proper standards. Back in his suite at the St. Regis, Charles loosened his bow tie and settled at the desk with his leather-bound notebook. His assistant Thomas arranged documents nearby, his face carefully blank. "Take this down," Charles instructed, his words slightly slurred. "Engineering department. Too casual. Needs structure. Suggest proper dress code enforcement." He paused to sip from his scotch. "AI division. Concerning lack of traditional hierarchy. Recommend management restructuring." Thomas typed quietly on his tablet, his jaw tightening with each note. "And that community program," Charles continued, "while admirable, requires significant oversight. Perhaps we should suggest more experienced leadership." Thomas finally spoke up. "Sir, If I may, I believe you might be misreading the situation. Charles looked up sharply. Oh? These teams are highly effective. Their metrics exceed industry standards. And Dr. Washington's leadership is actually studied at business schools as a model of innovation management. Come now, Thomas, Charles scoffed. You're letting optics cloud your judgment. I've built billion-dollar companies. I know what works. Sir, Thomas persisted carefully, Omnivise's culture is precisely why they're outperforming their competitors. Their unusual approach is actually their strength. Charles waved him off. Just note my recommendations. We'll need to make significant changes once the investment goes through. He turned back to his notebook, missing Thomas's concerned expression. More notes, Charles muttered, writing unsteadily. Diversity team, excessive influence on operations. Suggest relegating to HR only. He paused, frowning at his own handwriting. And that Dr. Richardson. Too aggressive for a girl. Needs to learn her place. Thomas stood abruptly, gathering his tablets. Sir, I really must insist. That will be all, Thomas. Charles cut him off sharply. We can finish the notes tomorrow. Good night. Thomas hesitated at the door, watching his boss scribble more notes with an increasingly unsteady hand. The assistant's face showed clear concern, knowing these recommendations would only dig his employer deeper into trouble. The morning sun streamed through the curved glass walls of Omnivise's Innovation Center. Elijah Brooks stood in the lobby, hands clasped behind his back, watching Charles Whitmore III emerge from his chauffeured car. The venture capitalist's steps were slower than usual, likely nursing a hangover from the previous night's wine-fueled dinner. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," Elijah said pleasantly. "I trust you slept well?" Charles adjusted his tie, squinting slightly at the bright atrium. "Quite well, thank you. Though I must say, I expected your head of operations to conduct today's tour. I prefer to handle certain aspects personally," Elijah replied, gesturing toward the security gates. "Especially when it comes to our crown jewel." They passed through the sleek security checkpoint, where Charles noticed every guard was impeccably dressed in suits that matched the caliber of his own. This detail seemed to unsettle him slightly. The innovation lab sprawled across 3 floors, connected by floating glass staircases. Holographic displays flickered between workstations, showing complex data models and architectural renderings. The space hummed with quiet intensity as engineers and designers moved purposefully between projects. "This is where we develop our next-generation AI systems," Elijah explained, leading Charles past a row of quantum computing stations. "Every piece of technology you see here was developed in-house." Charles nodded, trying to maintain his usual air of authority, despite being clearly overwhelmed. "Impressive hardware, certainly. Though I wonder about the, expertise level of your team." "You can ask them yourself," Elijah said, approaching a curved desk where a young woman sat surrounded by floating holographic displays. "Mr. Whitmore, meet Dr. Adana Okoro, our lead systems architect." Dr. Okoro turned, revealing a striking woman in her late 20s, wearing a perfectly tailored blazer over a traditional Nigerian head wrap. She stood with natural grace, extending her hand. "Welcome to my playground, Mr. Whitmore." Charles hesitated before taking her hand, his smile stiff. "Quite young for such a position, aren't you?" "Age is less relevant than achievement, wouldn't you agree?" she replied smoothly. With a gesture, she expanded one of her holographic displays. "I'd be happy to walk you through our latest quantum neural network architecture. Unless the mathematics would be too challenging." The subtle challenge in her voice made Charles's face flush slightly. "Please, proceed. Though perhaps in layman's terms?" "Of course." Dr. Okoro's fingers danced through the air, manipulating complex equations with practiced ease. "We've developed a new approach to quantum entanglement that allows for unprecedented processing power. Would you like me to explain how we solved the decoherence problem that stumped IBM for the past decade? Charles blinked rapidly, clearly out of his depth. I'm more interested in practical applications. What's the market potential? Currently, we're implementing this system in major hospitals to predict pandemic patterns, she said, pulling up another display. We've already saved an estimated 50,000 lives in underserved communities. But if you're focused solely on market value, we're projecting $3 billion in licensing fees next quarter alone. Elijah watched silently as Charles attempted to reassert control of the conversation. And who oversees your work? Surely there's a more senior architect who signs off on these projects? Dr. Okoro's smile remained perfectly professional. I report directly to Mr. Brooks. Would you like to see my patents? I hold 23 at last count, including the core architecture that powers most modern smartphones. Charles tugged at his collar, looking to Elijah for help. Finding none, he tried another angle. Fascinating. Where did you study? I completed my first PhD at MIT at 19, she replied. My second was from Stanford, where I now serve as a visiting professor. But my most valuable education came from my grandmother's village in Nigeria, where I learned that innovation isn't bound by Western expectations. The tour continued through the lab, with Dr. Okoro calmly dismantling every attempt Charles made to question her expertise. Her knowledge wasn't just comprehensive, it was revolutionary, and they both knew it. Later that evening, in his private office overlooking Atlanta's skyline, Elijah sat alone at his desk. The city lights twinkled below, but his attention was fixed on an old photograph in his hands. The image, worn at the edges, showed a young black woman in a maid's uniform standing outside a magnificent Connecticut mansion. She wore the same quiet dignity that Elijah carried now, even as she held a mop in her weathered hands. He ran his finger gently across his mother's face in the photograph. The Whitmore family mansion loomed behind her, a symbol of the wealth she helped maintain but could never access. Another photo showed her serving at one of the Whitmore's famous garden parties, invisible to the wealthy white guests she served. Elijah placed the photos carefully on his desk, remembering how his mother would come home exhausted but still help him with his homework, how she had saved every extra penny to buy him his first computer, how she had whispered to him every night, "They may own the house, but they don't own your mind." The confrontation with Charles was no longer just about business. Every dismissive glance, every condescending comment, echoed decades of ignored dignity and dismissed potential. Elijah straightened the photographs with precise movements, his mother's quiet strength flowing through his veins. The sun was setting over Atlanta's Buckhead district as Charles's car pulled up to Elijah Brooks's residence. The house, while impressive, wasn't the ostentatious mansion Charles had expected. Instead, it was a tastefully renovated historic home with clean lines and warm lighting spilling from its windows. Elijah greeted Charles at the door himself, dressed casually in a charcoal sweater and slacks. "Welcome to my home, Mr. Whitmore." Charles nodded stiffly, holding out a bottle of wine. "Thank you for the invitation. Though I must say, this is rather unconventional. Sometimes the best business discussions happen outside the boardroom," Elijah replied, leading Charles through the foyer. The walls were lined with photographs in simple black frames, creating an intimate gallery of memories. The dining room was set for two, with fine china and crystal glasses that spoke of refined taste without flashiness. A private chef served their first course, a delicate butternut squash soup that Charles had to admit was excellent. "Your home is different than I imagined," Charles said, his eyes wandering to the photos on the walls. "What did you imagine?" Elijah asked, his voice carrying that same calm tone he always maintained. Charles shifted in his chair. Well, given your success, I expected something more. Extravagant, Elijah finished for him. I prefer to invest in things that matter: community programs, education initiatives, preserving history. As they moved to the main course, perfectly seared sea bass, Charles found his attention repeatedly drawn to a particular photograph. It showed a young black woman in a simple dress, standing proudly next to a young boy in a graduation cap and gown. "Your mother?" Charles asked, gesturing to the photo with his wine glass. "Yes," Elijah said softly. "That was my elementary school graduation. She worked 3 jobs to put me through private school." Charles nodded absently, taking another sip of wine. "What kind of work did she do?" "Mainly domestic work," Elijah replied, watching Charles carefully. "She cleaned houses in Connecticut for wealthy families. Worked her way up to head housekeeper for some of the most prominent names in Greenwich." Charles's wineglass paused halfway to his lips. "Connecticut, you say?" "Yes," Elijah continued, his voice measured. "In fact, one of her longest positions was with a family named Whitmore. Beautiful mansion on Maple Hill Road. She worked there throughout the 1970s. The fork in Charles's hand froze mid-air, a piece of sea bass suspended in time. His face drained of color as memory stirred in his mind. "The house had a grand staircase," Elijah continued, "with a curved banister that took hours to polish. Mother would come home with aching hands from the work, but she never complained. She was particularly proud of keeping the crystal chandelier spotless." Charles set down his fork with a slight tremor. I don't recall." "You wouldn't," Elijah said. "The help was meant to be invisible. But she remembered you, Charles. She remembered how you never looked her in the eye, even when she served your breakfast every morning for 15 years. The private chef silently cleared their plates, replacing them with dessert neither man would touch. The ticking of a grandfather clock echoed through the room. "She saved every extra dollar she earned in that house," Elijah continued, his voice still calm but carrying the weight of decades. "Put it all toward my education. Said she wanted me to sit at tables like the ones she cleaned." Charles reached for his water glass, his throat suddenly dry. "That was a different time." "Was it?" Elijah asked, raising an eyebrow. 4 days ago, you wouldn't shake my hand in my own boardroom." The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. Charles barely touched his dessert, his mind clearly elsewhere. When he finally left, Elijah watched from his doorway as the car disappeared into the night. In his hotel suite later that night, Charles lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Fragments of memories floated through his mind. A quiet woman in a gray uniform, moving efficiently through their house. How she would appear and disappear like a ghost, keeping their world pristine, without ever being acknowledged. He vaguely remembered her face now. The same quiet dignity he recognized in Elijah. The same careful way of moving through spaces dominated by others. She had served countless dinner parties, holiday celebrations, and business meetings, always maintaining that invisible barrier between served and server. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his bed, remembering more details. How she would sometimes bring her young son to work when school was closed. A serious boy who sat quietly in the kitchen reading books. Had that been Elijah? The thought made his stomach turn. The city lights cast shifting shadows across his hotel room as Charles confronted memories he'd never thought to examine before. The maid who had kept their home running smoothly for all those years. What had her name been? He couldn't even remember that much. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Camilla's corner office at Omnivise. She was reviewing the gala preparations for that evening when her phone buzzed with an unexpected email notification. From Helen, WhitmoreEdgemail.com. Subject, regarding Charles Whitmore. Third, important information. Camilla sat up straighter, her fingers hovering over the screen. She'd heard of Helen Whitmore, the daughter Charles never mentioned, who disappeared from Greenwich's social circles years ago. The email was direct. Ms. Brooks, I've been following the situation with my father at Omnivise. There's information you should have about his investment practices. I left the family business years ago because of his discriminatory policies, but I kept documentation. Would you be willing to meet? Camilla's heart raced as she dialed Helen's number. The voice that answered was soft, but determined. Thank you for calling, Helen said. I've been watching this unfold from afar. My father, he hasn't changed. We'd love to hear your perspective, Camilla replied, trying to contain her excitement. I have emails, hundreds of them. Internal memos about cultural fit requirements for investments. Lists of companies rejected solely because of their founder's race. He's been systematically blocking minority-owned businesses from accessing capital for decades. Camilla's fingers flew across her keyboard, taking notes. Would you be willing to share these documents? I already have them prepared, Helen said. I've been waiting for the right moment. When I saw him refuse to shake Mr. Brooks's hand, it brought back every painful memory. Helen's voice cracked slightly. I left home at 23. My mother was black, one of his college girlfriends. He kept us a secret until he couldn't anymore. When I started questioning his business practices, pointing out the racism, he told me I was too emotional about these things. Camilla leaned back in her chair, absorbing the weight of Helen's words. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. But walking away was the best decision I ever made. I've built my own life, working in diversity advocacy. But these documents, they could expose everything. Would you be willing to meet in person? Camilla asked. I'm actually in Atlanta now, Helen replied. I flew in last night. I knew the gala was coming up, and, well, timing is everything. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe near Omnivise headquarters. An hour later, Camilla sat across from a woman whose features carried echoes of Charles Whitmore, but whose presence was entirely her own. Helen was elegant and composed, with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Helen slid a USB drive across the table. Everything's here. Email threads, meeting minutes, internal memos spanning 15 years. He was careful with his language, but the pattern is clear. Camilla picked up the drive, feeling its weight. Not just physical, but historical. This could change everything. That's what I'm hoping for, Helen said. But there's something else you should know. She pulled out her phone, showing Camilla a series of recent texts from Charles's assistant. Thomas has been keeping me informed. My father's planning something for his speech tonight. Camilla hurried back to Omnivise, finding her father in his office. Elijah was reviewing his own speech for the gala when she burst in. Dad, we have it. Actual proof of Charles's discrimination. His own daughter brought it to us. Camilla's words tumbled out as she explained everything Helen had shared. Elijah listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. When Camilla finished, he was quiet for a long moment. We need to wait, he finally said. Wait? Dad, this is exactly what we need to— Let him speak tonight, Elijah interrupted gently. Let him stand in front of everyone and show exactly who he is. The evidence will mean more after he's exposed himself publicly. Camilla paced the office. But we could stop him now, before he— Sometimes, Elijah said, the most powerful move is to give someone enough rope to hang themselves. Charles has spent a lifetime hiding behind carefully worded memos and private conversations. Tonight, he'll be on stage, unfiltered, in front of hundreds of people. The rest of the day passed in a blur of gala preparations. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons was transformed with elegant decorations in Omnivise's colors. Tech industry leaders, investors, and media figures filled the space, creating a buzz of anticipation. Charles arrived early, dressed in an expensive tuxedo, looking confident despite the week's tensions. He worked the room with practiced charm, shaking hands and laughing with other wealthy investors. If he noticed Helen sitting quietly at a corner table, he gave no indication. Camilla watched him from across the room, the USB drive feeling heavy in her clutch bag. Her father stood at her elbow, calm as always. "The keynote speech is in 10 minutes, she whispered. Elijah nodded. Sometimes justice requires patience. Let's see what Charles has to say when he thinks he's among friends. The Four Seasons ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and the flash of smartphone cameras. Nearly 400 of Atlanta's most influential business leaders filled the space, their evening wear reflecting the soft golden lighting. Tech journalists from major publications lined the back wall, notebooks and recording devices ready. Charles Whitmore III adjusted his bow tie as he waited for his introduction. Despite the week's challenges, he felt in his element here, surrounded by wealth and power. He'd given countless speeches like this before. The MC, a local news anchor, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker for the evening, Mr. Charles Whitmore III, managing partner of Greenwich Capital Partners." Polite applause rippled through the room as Charles took the stage. He gripped the sides of the podium, surveying the crowd with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. "Thank you all for that warm welcome," he began, his voice carrying the polished tone of old money. "This past week at Omnivise has been enlightening." A few knowing chuckles from the audience. Charles smiled, warming to his theme. "I've seen firsthand how this company is embracing what we might call progressive values in the tech space." He paused, letting the words hang. It's quite remarkable what they've achieved with their unique approach to talent acquisition. In the front row, Camilla's knuckles whitened around her champagne glass. Beside her, Elijah sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. "When I first arrived," Charles continued, "I'll admit I had my doubts about their unconventional methods, but seeing their community programs, truly inspiring work, helping the underprivileged access technology careers, well, it's exactly the kind of social responsibility that plays well in today's market." He took a sip of water, missing the growing tension in the room. "Of course, as investors, we have to balance these admirable social initiatives with hard business realities. My 40 years in venture capital have taught me that success requires maintaining certain standards, cultural alignment, if you will." A few uncomfortable shifts in the audience. Some journalists began writing more quickly. What Omnivise has managed to do, integrating diversity initiatives while still maintaining profitability, it's quite remarkable. Almost surprising, really? Charles chuckled. Though I suppose that's what makes them such an interesting investment opportunity. He launched into a series of self-congratulatory anecdotes about his past investments, repeatedly referring to Omnivise's approach as experimental and bold. Each comment landed like a lead weight in the increasingly uncomfortable room. "In conclusion," Charles said, "I look forward to bringing Greenwich Capital's traditional excellence to this exciting new venture. With proper guidance, I believe we can help Omnivise achieve even greater heights while maintaining their unique character." The applause was scattered and brief. Charles returned to his seat, apparently satisfied with his performance. The MC quickly returned to the podium. "And now, please welcome Omnivise's founder and CEO, Mr. Elijah Brooks." Elijah rose slowly, straightening his jacket. The room fell completely silent as he took the stage. He didn't touch the podium, instead standing slightly to its side, his presence filling the space naturally. "Thank you," he began, his voice quiet but clear. Mr. Whitmore's speech was, indeed, enlightening. A ripple of nervous laughter. "You know, 40 years ago, my mother worked as a housekeeper in Greenwich, Connecticut." Elijah's words carried easily across the silent room. "She cleaned the homes of wealthy families, including one particular house on Maple Drive, the Whitmore house." Charles's face drained of color. "Every day she would arrive at 6 a.m. through the service entrance. She dusted their antiques, polished their silver, scrubbed their floors. She did this so I could attend good schools, so I could have opportunities." Elijah's voice remained measured, but it carried decades of quiet power. "What Mr. Whitmore calls unconventional methods, we call merit-based hiring. What he terms experimental, we call excellence. What he views as surprising success, we recognize as the natural result of removing artificial barriers." The room was absolutely still. Every eye was fixed on Elijah. The truth about success in America isn't about cultural alignment or maintaining standards. Those are just code words, aren't they, Mr. Whitmore? Code for keeping certain people out, certain doors closed. Elijah stepped forward slightly. "Success is built on the labor of people like my mother. People who were denied opportunities but never stopped working, never stopped believing, never stopped pushing those doors open for the next generation." Several people in the audience were nodding. A few had tears in their eyes. At Omnivise, we don't need proper guidance from those who've benefited from exclusion. We're not an experiment in diversity. We're proof that when you remove the gatekeepers, when you judge purely on merit, excellence naturally emerges. From all communities, all backgrounds. Elijah turned slightly, looking directly at Charles. "My mother had to use the back door at your house, Mr. Whitmore, but I own the building you're sitting in right now, and that's not surprising. It's justice." The room erupted in thunderous applause. People began standing, the ovation spreading like a wave through the ballroom. Journalists were furiously taking notes, cameras flashing. Charles sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of humiliation and shock. He watched as Elijah received his standing ovation, the truth of his own exposed prejudice reflecting back at him from hundreds of faces. Helen Whitmore, from her corner table, stood with the rest, tears streaming down her face as she applauded her father's public unmasking. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elijah's corner office as he sipped his morning coffee. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before him, but his attention was fixed on his computer screen. His inbox notification had chimed at 6:45 a.m. An email from Helen Whitmore. Camilla burst through the door without knocking, her laptop clutched to her chest. "Dad, have you seen what Helen sent?" "I'm looking at it now," Elijah said quietly, gesturing for her to sit. Camilla pulled up a chair next to him, opening her own laptop. "There are hundreds of emails here. 10 years of correspondence. It's exactly what we thought, but worse." They scrolled through email after email, each one more damning than the last. Charles Whitmore's prejudices lay bare in black and white, carefully worded but unmistakable in their intent. From Charles Whitmore, GreenwichCapital.com, to Investment Committee, Greenwich Capital. Subject, Investment Guidelines Update. Confidential Team. Following our recent discussion about portfolio diversity, I want to clarify our approach. While we publicly support inclusion, our primary focus remains on teams that align with our traditional values. Please flag any urban-led startups or diverse teams with activist leanings for additional scrutiny. We need to maintain our standards. Cultural fit is paramount. I trust you understand my meaning. Regards, Charles. "Look at this one," Camilla said, pointing to another email thread. He explicitly told his team to find reasons to reject any company with black leadership. From Charles.Whitmore, GreenwichCapital.com to Sarah Peterson, GreenwichCapital.com. Subject: Tech Fusion Proposal. Sarah, I reviewed the Tech Fusion pitch. While their numbers are strong, I'm concerned about their leadership's background. Find some issues with their market analysis or governance structure. We need a diplomatic way to pass. Remember our conversation about maintaining the right image for our limited partners? Elijah leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Helen must have been collecting these for years. There's a note from her, Camilla said, opening another document. She says she started saving them after she left the family. She knew someday they might matter. The morning light caught the edges of family photos on Elijah's desk. His mother in her Sunday best, Camilla's graduation from Harvard, the opening of Omnivise's first office. Generations of struggle and triumph captured in silver frames. "What do you want to do with these?" Camilla asked, though her tone suggested she already had a plan. Elijah studied his daughter's face. "You're thinking about sending them to the press." "Anonymously," Camilla nodded. "I have contacts at TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal. They've been following the gala story already. This would blow it wide open." "The consequences would be severe," Elijah said carefully. "Not just for Charles, but for everyone at Greenwich Capital. A lot of innocent people could be affected." Camilla stood up, pacing the office. "And how many innocent people have been affected by his discrimination? How many brilliant founders never got funding because they didn't fit his traditional values?" She stopped at the window, looking out over the city. "This isn't just about revenge, Dad. It's about exposure. The whole system needs to see itself in the mirror." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Do it, but be careful. Make sure the documents can't be traced back to Helen." Camilla sat down at her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. She had prepared encrypted emails to 3 trusted journalists, attaching key documents with personal information redacted. Within minutes, the messages were sent. "Now we wait," she said, closing her laptop. They didn't have to wait long. By 10 a.m., their phones started buzzing with notifications. The first story broke on TechCrunch. Exclusive. Leaked emails reveal systematic discrimination at top VC firm. The Wall Street Journal followed an hour later. Greenwich Capital partner Charles Whitmore III implicated in bias scandal. The business world's reaction was swift and fierce. Whitmore emails started trending on Twitter. CNBC ran breaking news segments. Charles's face appeared on financial news channels, his gala speech from the previous night now playing alongside screenshots of his damning emails. By noon, Greenwich Capital's PR team had released a desperate statement about investigating the allegations and maintaining high ethical standards. But the damage was done. Elijah's phone rang, a board member from another venture capital firm seeking his comment. He let it go to voicemail. Camilla's screen showed dozens of messages from tech reporters wanting statements. Through the glass walls of the office, they could see Omnivise employees gathered around their computers, reading the news in real time. The energy in the building was electric, a sense that something long hidden was finally being dragged into the light. "Look at this," Camilla said, showing her father her phone. 3 of Greenwich Capital's largest limited partners had announced they were reviewing their relationships with the firm. Charles's other board positions were already being questioned. Elijah watched the chaos unfold with the same quiet composure he'd maintained all week. "Sometimes," he said softly, "justice comes through patience, through letting people reveal themselves fully before they fall." His words were interrupted by another breaking news alert. Charles Whitmore III had canceled all public appearances and stepped back from his daily duties at Greenwich Capital, effective immediately. The paper trail he'd left behind was becoming his undoing, one headline at a time. Charles Whitmore III sat in his mahogany-paneled home office, watching his empire crumble through the endless stream of notifications on his phone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Persian rug, but he hadn't moved from his leather chair since dawn. His phone buzzed again. Another board member demanding answers. "Charles, this is inexcusable. The Times is asking for comment. What am I supposed to tell them?" He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his usual authoritative tone. "Richard, these emails are being taken out of context. If you'd just let me explain—" "Save it. We're calling an emergency meeting at noon. Your position at Tech Ventures is under review." The line went dead. Charles's hand shook as he set down the phone, only for it to start ringing again immediately. This time, it was Margaret Chen from the Innovation Fund. "I trusted you, Charles." "We all did. Do you know how this makes the entire industry look?" "Margaret, please." The board vote was unanimous. "We expect your resignation letter within the hour." Another call ended. Another piece of his carefully constructed world falling away. His assistant, Sarah Peterson, appeared in the doorway. Her face was set in grim lines as she held up her tablet. "Mr. Whitmore, CNBC is running another segment, and—" "I've prepared my resignation letter." Charles looked up sharply. "Sarah, you've been with me for 8 years." "Yes," she said quietly. "Long enough to know these emails are real. I can't be part of this anymore." She placed an envelope on his desk and walked out, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor for the last time. His phone kept ringing. Journalists, partners, old friends suddenly discovering their conscience. Each call brought more bad news, more demands for accountability. "The CEO of Master Tech Solutions. We're terminating our partnership agreement." A diversity advocate on CNN. These emails reveal the systemic racism that's been hiding in plain sight in venture capital. A former mentee. "I trusted you. You were my reference for 3 board positions. Now, I have to distance myself just to survive." Charles pulled up his email, desperate to gain control of the narrative, but his corporate account had been suspended. Standard protocol during investigations, they said. His personal inbox was flooded with hundreds of unread messages, many with subject lines like "disgusted" and "shame on you." He clicked on one from his country club. His membership was under review. Another from his alma mater's board of trustees. They were re-evaluating his position. The TV droned in the background, his own face appearing again and again in clips from the Omnivise Gala. Each replay of his speech made him wince. The smug confidence, the thinly veiled condescension. How had he not seen it? A text message lit up his phone. "Dad, I hope you finally understand why I left. Helen." That one hurt the most. He hadn't spoken to his daughter in years, not since she'd confronted him about his subtle racism at a family dinner. He'd dismissed her concerns then. Now her words echoed in his head. The afternoon brought no relief. His lawyer called with updates about potential legal exposure. His wealth manager warned about the impact on his investment portfolio. Greenwich Capital's managing partners were calling an emergency vote on his status. By 4 o'clock, he'd lost 2 board seats, his position as chairman of the Innovation Fund, and 3 major corporate partnerships. His carefully curated LinkedIn profile was being picked apart on social media. Old photos were surfacing, showing decades of exclusively white male leadership teams. Charles paced his office, his collar loose, his tie long discarded. The carefully maintained facade of the successful businessman was cracking. He needed to do something, anything, to stop this free fall. With trembling fingers, he dialed Elijah Brooks's direct line. To his surprise, Elijah answered on the first ring. Mr. Whitmore, Elijah's voice was calm, measured. I've been expecting your call. This is your doing, Charles spat out. You orchestrated this whole thing. The tour, the gala, the emails. It was all a setup. No, Charles, Elijah replied softly. You did this to yourself. Every email, every decision, every handshake refused. Those were all your choices. We need to meet, now. I can explain everything. There was a pause on the line. Charles could hear his own ragged breathing. All right, Elijah said finally. But we meet on my terms. The community center where we started the tour. 1 hour. A community center? I'm not going back there. My office. The community center, Elijah repeated firmly. Or not at all. Charles looked around his pristine office, at the awards and photographs that suddenly seemed meaningless. His phone buzzed with another incoming call. Probably more bad news. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. 1 hour. He hung up and stared out his window at the manicured grounds of his estate. For the first time in his life, Charles Whitmore III felt truly powerless, and he was about to walk into the lion's den. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Charles Whitmore III pushed through the double doors. His Italian leather shoes squeaked against the freshly waxed floor, echoing through the empty gymnasium. The space felt different now, more imposing, less like the convenient backdrop for corporate philanthropy he'd once considered it. Elijah Brooks stood at center court, hands in the pockets of his charcoal suit pants. No tie today, no pretense. The basketball hoops cast long shadows across his face, but his eyes remained clear and focused. Charles straightened his own tie, a nervous habit from decades of boardroom battles. But this wasn't a boardroom, and he wasn't in control. Mr. Brooks, Charles started, his voice wavering slightly. Thank you for meeting me. Elijah didn't move to shake his hand. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Let's skip the pleasantries, Charles, Elijah said quietly. You've had a rough day. Charles's carefully prepared speech dissolved. This is destroying everything I've built. My reputation, my partnerships, gone. Over what? A few emails? Some misunderstandings? Misunderstandings? Elijah's eyebrows raised slightly. Is that what we're calling systematic exclusion now? Look, Charles stepped closer, desperation creeping into his voice. I can change. I'll set up a diversity fund. I'll hire whoever you recommend. Name your price. There must be something you want. Elijah shook his head slowly. You still don't get it. This isn't about making deals or saving face. This is about consequences. But my whole life's work, your whole life's work, Elijah cut in, has been building walls while claiming to open doors. Those emails didn't reveal anything new, Charles. They just confirmed what people like me have always known. Charles wiped sweat from his forehead. The gym felt smaller by the minute. People make mistakes. Everyone has biases. You can't destroy a man's life over what? Elijah's voice remained steady, but carried an edge now. Over refusing to shake a black man's hand? Over systematically excluding talented founders because they didn't look like you? Over treating my daughter like she needed your approval to lead her own company? He stepped closer to Charles, his presence filling the space between them. You're not being punished for one moment, Charles. You're facing the consequences of a lifetime of decisions. Every time you saw talent but chose comfort. Every time you heard truth but chose privilege. Charles's shoulders slumped. The fight was draining from him. What do you want from me? Want? Elijah almost smiled. I don't want anything from you. This isn't about revenge. It's about reality finally catching up. He gestured to the empty gym around them. You stood right here 3 months ago, lecturing kids about pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. You got your photo op, your PR boost, but you never once looked those children in the eyes and saw their potential. You never once considered that they might be the next generation of founders and CEOs. Charles remembered that day, how he'd rushed through the speech, barely glancing at the young faces in the crowd. He'd been more concerned with making his golf tee time. You refused to shake the hand of a man you didn't even try to know, Elijah continued. Not because of my capabilities, my achievements, or my character, but because you'd decided, long before you met me, exactly who was worthy of your respect. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Charles thought of Helen, his daughter, and all the times he'd dismissed her concerns. He thought of the promising startups he'd passed over, the talents he'd ignored, the voices he'd silenced, all to maintain his comfortable version of the world. So, what happens now? Charles asked, his voice small in the vast space. Now. Elijah straightened his jacket. Now you do what the rest of us have always had to do. You adapt. You learn. Or you don't. But either way, the world is changing, with or without your permission. He turned toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the empty gym. Charles stood rooted to the spot where he'd once posed for photos, feeling the weight of every decision, every dismissal, every refusal to see beyond his own privilege. "Mr. Brooks," Charles called out weakly. "I never meant to—" "That's the problem, Charles," Elijah said, pausing at the door. "You never meant to see us at all." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Charles alone in the gymnasium. The space that had once been his stage for performative charity now felt like a courtroom where final judgment had been passed. Above him, the fluorescent lights continued their endless hum, illuminating everything he'd tried so hard not to see. The Omnivise headquarters main auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Camera crews adjusted their equipment while journalists filled the front rows, notebooks ready. The stage held a simple podium with the company's logo glowing softly behind it. Elijah Brooks stood in the wings, watching the crowd settle. His hand rested on a framed black-and-white photograph. His mother, Clara, young and determined, wearing her maid's uniform outside the Whitmore mansion. He'd brought it for strength, though he knew she'd been giving him that his whole life. Camilla appeared beside him, radiant in a deep purple suit. "Ready, Dad?" He nodded, squeezing her shoulder. "More than ready." The lights dimmed slightly as Elijah took the stage. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. He placed the photograph carefully on the podium, letting it face the audience. "Good morning," he began, his voice clear and measured. "Behind every fortune in America, there's a story we don't tell. Behind every mansion, every corporate tower, every legacy of wealth, there are people who cleaned the floors, worked the land, and built the foundations only to be written out of the story." He gestured to the photograph. "This is my mother, Clara Brooks, taken in 1972. She cleaned houses for wealthy families in Connecticut, including the Whitmore estate. She worked 14-hour days, earned less than minimum wage, and still managed to save enough to buy me my first computer." The room was completely silent now. "Today, I'm not here to announce another tech innovation or merger. I'm here to honor a different kind of innovation, the kind that comes from seeing people's true potential, regardless of their background." Camilla stepped onto the stage, followed by a tall, elegant woman with light brown skin, Helen Whitmore. The audience stirred with recognition. "I'm proud to announce the Clara Brooks Equity Fund, with an initial investment of $500 million, Elijah continued. "This fund will specifically support founders from historically excluded communities, not as charity, but as an investment in talent that others have foolishly overlooked." He turned to Helen, who stepped forward. "Ms. Helen Whitmore has agreed to serve as the fund's board chair. Her experience in equity-focused philanthropy, combined with her unique perspective on privilege and responsibility, makes her the perfect leader for this initiative. Helen approached the microphone, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. My father, Charles Whitmore III, spent his career building walls. Today, I'm honored to help tear them down. This fund isn't about making amends, it's about making change. Cameras flashed as Helen and Elijah shook hands. The gesture carried weight, a symbolic reversal of the handshake that had started this journey. But there's one more announcement, Elijah said, smiling at Camilla. Every parent hopes their children will surpass them. Today, I'm proud to announce that Camilla Brooks will be assuming the role of CEO of Omnivise Technologies, effective immediately. The audience erupted in applause. Camilla stepped to the podium, her presence commanding the room just as her father's had. For too long, leadership in tech has looked one way, sounded one way, thought one way, she began. That ends now. Not gradually, not eventually. Now. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gaining intensity. To every young person who's been told to wait their turn. To every brilliant mind that's been overlooked. To every founder who's been told they don't fit the culture. Your time isn't coming. It's here. The energy in the room crackled. Journalists scribbled frantically. We're not asking for permission anymore. We're not waiting for gatekeepers to open doors. We're building our own doors, our own tables, our own future. Camilla's eyes swept the room. And to those who aren't ready for this change, get ready. Because we're not slowing down, we're not stepping back, and we're definitely not asking for approval. She gestured to the photograph of her grandmother. Clara Brooks cleaned houses so her son could build companies. He built companies so I could transform industries. That's not just a family story. It's the story of every family that's been pushed to the margins while carrying this country on their backs. The applause was thunderous now. Elijah watched his daughter, pride swelling in his chest. She'd taken everything he'd built and was already seeing beyond it, pushing further, demanding more. Leadership isn't just about who sits in the CEO's chair, Camilla continued. It's about who gets funded, who gets hired, who gets heard. Starting today, we're changing all of it. Not with gentle nudges, but with seismic shifts. She stood straighter, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. The face of leadership is changing. Permanently. Not because it's trendy, not because it's politically correct, but because talent doesn't have a single color, gender, or background. And it's about time our boardrooms reflected that reality. The audience rose to their feet. Helen wiped tears from her eyes. Elijah stepped forward to join his daughter, the photograph of Clara Brooks watching over them all. 3 generations of change, finally coming full circle. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.